I want to warn you about something before this story begins. There are testimonies that come to this channel that generate a very specific feeling in me when I read them. Something between unease and recognition, as if the person writing had touched something real that they shouldn't have touched. Camila, a university student from Bogota, sent me this account in 3 parts, over 3 different nights, as if she needed to take breaks to continue writing. If you enjoy this type of stories and you are not yet subscribed to the channel, now is a good time to do so. There are new stories every week. Now, listen to what happened to Camila when she started to investigate who had lived before her in her apartment, and why the 4th floor of that building had been vacant for years. She was 24 years old when all this happened and had just begun her last year of university. I studied social communication, and at that time I was living with Renata, a classmate, in a 4th floor apartment of a 1950s building in downtown Bogota. It was an old building but well maintained, one of those with a metal gate elevator and worn marble stairs that creak on the middle steps. The kind of building that has character, that feels different from modern blocks without texture or history. Renata and I had been living there for a year when things started happening. A quiet year, with nothing out of the ordinary, following the usual routine of 2 students sharing space. Classes, assignments, long nights before exams, weekends of rest. The apartment we occupied was 401, the first one on the 4th floor as you exit the elevator. The 4th floor corridor had 4 apartments, 401 ours, 402 next door, 403 at the far left, and 404 at the far right. Apartments 402 and 403 were occupied by neighbors I greeted but with whom I had no further dealings, an elderly lady in 402 and a young couple in 403. Apartment 404 was empty, not just empty in the sense of temporarily unoccupied. Empty in a way that I noticed from the first day I moved in, without knowing exactly what it was that I was noticing. 404 always had its door closed with an additional lock, no doormat outside, no signs of life or traffic. And the corridor around that door felt different from the rest of the hallway. Colder, always, even though the other doors were closed too. A very specific localized cold that disappeared a few steps away from 404. I noticed it and ignored it. We had many things to think about. The first time I asked the doorman about 404 was about 3 months after we moved in, casually, one morning when I went down to pick up a package. Mr. Heriberto was the doorman of the building, a man in his 80s, thin and quiet, who had been in that building for decades and knew it like one knows an extension of one's own body. He was kind but terse, with short answers and an evaluative gaze. I asked him if 404 had been vacant for a long time. Mr. Heriberto looked at me for a moment before answering. "A long time," he said. "Why don't they rent it out?" Another pause. "The owner prefers to keep it that way." I didn't ask any more questions, but something in his tone in that pause before answering lingered vaguely in my mind in the following days. The topic of 404 came back to my mind a month later when Renata mentioned something during dinner. "Have you noticed the smell sometimes in the hallway?" she asked. "What smell?" "Like flowers, but old flowers, like the ones they put on altars. Incense, perhaps, or something similar." I thought about it. Yes, I had noticed it, although I hadn't consciously paid attention. A sweet and dense smell that sometimes appeared in the hallway on the 4th floor with no apparent source and disappeared just as quickly. "Where do you think it comes from?" I asked. Renata shrugged, but looked at me with that expression of hers when something bothers her more than she wants to admit. "From 404, I suppose. Although if it's empty, I don't understand how." We didn't say more about the topic that night. But something had opened up between us, a shared awareness of the back apartment that until that moment, each of us had processed in silence. The following week, while Renata was in class and I had the apartment to myself, I did something that in retrospect I shouldn't have done. I went to the hallway and stopped in front of the door of 404. It was a dark wooden door, thicker than the other doors in the hallway, with 2 locks instead of 1. The paint was in good condition, which meant someone was maintaining it even though no one lived inside. There was no mail slot. The absent doormat had left a rectangular mark on the hallway floor, slightly darker than the rest of the marble. I crouched down and tried to look through the lower keyhole. I saw nothing. Either the lock was blocked from the inside or there simply wasn't enough light on the other side. I stood up and placed my palm against the door. The wood was cold, much colder than the air in the hallway. which was already cooler than the rest of the floor. A chill that came from inside, as if on the other side of that door there was a space kept at a consistently lower temperature than anything the building's physics could explain. And then I heard something. It was very soft, almost imperceptible, and lasted only a few seconds. A sound coming from inside the apartment, like the brushing of fabric against the floor, like someone moving very slowly in a silent space. A movement, deliberate and slow. I withdrew my hand from the door and walked away from there with steps quicker than I would have liked to acknowledge. That afternoon I told Renata what I had heard. She listened to me with the expression of someone who wants to be rational but struggles to do so in light of certain details. "Camila," she said, "don't do that again." "Why?" "Because there are reasons why that apartment is closed, and they don't concern us, and because meddling in other people's doors in old buildings leads to nothing good." I listened to her. For a week, I kept away from the corridor more than necessary. I entered and exited our apartment without stopping. I looked down when I passed in front of 404, but I kept thinking, that's my nature. I can't leave a mystery without trying to understand it. I study communication precisely because I am fascinated by research, finding the stories that lie beneath the visible stories. And 404 was a story that lay beneath something. I felt it with a certainty that I couldn't rationalize but also couldn't ignore. I started indirectly. I went to the building administration, which was on the first floor, and asked the lady at the desk if they had any information about the history of apartment 404, under the pretext that I was doing a university project on historical residential architecture in Bogota. The lady looked at me with an expression that mixed kindness and something harder to read. "That apartment is not available for visits," she said. "I don't want to visit it, just historical information. Who lived there? How long has it been vacant?" The lady typed something on her computer and spent a moment looking at the screen. "The apartment 404 has been unleased since 1987, she finally said. "The owner has renewed the management contract every year, but without leasing authorization. Do you know why?" Another evaluative look. "You would have to ask the owner directly." I couldn't contact the owner. The administration didn't give me their details, but the date stuck with me. Since 1987. 30-something years with that apartment empty, paying administration fees, renewing contracts, without renting or selling it. That wasn't just negligence or disinterest. It was an active decision to keep it that way. I told Renata that night. "Since 1987, she repeated. "That's before both of us were born." "Exactly. Something happened there. Or someone doesn't want anything else to happen," Renata said, with a logic that seemed more disturbing than mine. I decided to search in another way. I had access to the university's newspaper archive, where Bogota newspapers had been digitized from decades ago. I spent 2 afternoons looking for any note related to the building's address. I found it in a newspaper from October 1987. It was a small note, half a column without a photo. He was talking about the death of a woman in an apartment in the building, a lady with the last name Castaño, whose death had been classified as natural, but had generated some attention because the woman lived alone and had gone several days before anyone noticed her absence. The note did not give the apartment number, but it did give the floor, the 4th. I searched more. In another newspaper, a week later, I found a letter to the editor, one of those that readers used to send at that time, which mentioned the building obliquely and spoke of inappropriate practices that supposedly Mrs. Castaño had carried out in her apartment for years, and that according to the author of the letter were known in the building, although no one officially reported them. The letter did not specify what kind of practices, but it used a word that made me stare at the screen for a good while. The word invocations. That night I did not sleep well. I showed the clippings to Renata the next day. She read them silently, with that expression of internal processing that I knew well. "Camila," she said when she finished, "I'm going to ask you something." "What?" "To stop here, to not keep searching." "Why?" "Because there's a difference between understanding something and getting involved. We've understood enough. There's a dead woman in that apartment for 30 years, or at least something related to her, and the owner of the apartment made the decision to keep it closed, probably for reasons we don't need to know in detail." I looked at her. "Have you felt something too?" I asked. "Not just the smell, something more." Renata took a moment. Sometimes at night, I hear something in the hallway. Steps. Very slow. That stop in front of our door. I was frozen. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want you to do exactly what you're doing. I had 3 days of forced calm during which I tried to follow Renata's advice. I went to classes, worked on my projects, had a normal dinner, and slept reasonably. But 404 was still there, at the end of the hallway, and I was still the person who can't leave a mystery untouched. On the 4th night I broke. It was 1 in the morning, Renata was asleep, and I was awake with the laptop when I heard what Renata had described. Footsteps in the hallway. Slow, measured, with that particular rhythm that footsteps have when someone is not in a hurry because they have nowhere to go. I got up. I put on my shoes. I opened the apartment door carefully enough not to make a sound. The hallway was empty and dark, illuminated only by the emergency light at the end. The smell of old flowers was present with an intensity it hadn't had before. Dense, almost physical, as if the air itself were impregnated, and the door to 404 was ajar, not completely open. Just a few centimeters, enough for a faint, yellowish, flickering strip of light to escape through the crack, like that of a candle. I stood frozen in the doorway of our apartment for what must have been several seconds. My brain was processing what my eyes were seeing with that slowness that comes when reality does not fit any known category. The door that was always locked with a double lock was open. There was light inside. There was someone inside. I walked toward 404. I know I shouldn't have done it. I know it clearly now. And on some level, I knew it at that moment. But there is something about certain thresholds, something in the combination of darkness and light and smell and the particular silence of dawns that suspends ordinary judgment and replaces it with something more akin to inevitable attraction. I reached the door of 404 and pushed it very gently. It opened without resistance. What I saw inside, I won't be able to describe with the precision I would like, because there are parts that my memory registered in a fragmented way, as happens with things that the brain doesn't have the category to archive completely. The apartment was large, larger than I expected, with high ceilings and walls that must have been white but were covered, from floor to ceiling, with something that took me a moment to identify. Papers. Hundreds of papers stuck to the walls, covered in handwriting, tight and small, in ink that seemed dark, but in the candlelight, which burned in chandeliers distributed throughout the space, had a tone I don't want to describe in more detail. The floor was covered with drawings made with something in powder, circles and lines that formed complex geometric patterns that spread across the entire surface of the apartment. There were objects in the center of the patterns, things I couldn't name, shapes that didn't correspond to anything I could easily categorize. And in the center of the apartment, with its back to me, there was a figure. It was a woman. Or she had the shape of a woman, tall, with long white hair completely loose that reached her waist, dressed in something dark and without a defined shape. She was standing still in the center of the floor patterns, with her arms slightly separated from her body. She hadn't moved when I opened the door. She didn't turn when I entered. But I knew, with a certainty that came from somewhere deeper than reasoning, that she knew I was there. "Who are you?" I asked. My voice sounded strange in that space, crushed, as if the air absorbed the sound instead of transmitting it. The figure did not respond, but slowly, with a slowness that did not correspond to any human movement I had seen, she began to turn. I didn't get to see her face. Something grabbed my arm from behind with a strength I didn't expect, and pulled me into the hallway. Renata, with her hair down and her eyes wide open, had an expression on her face that I had never seen in the year we had been living together. She pulled me into the hallway and slammed the door of 404 shut. "Camilla," she said in a whisper that was almost a shout. "Camilla, don't look back. Just walk." I walked. We entered our apartment. Renata locked the door, put on the chain, and stood with her back against the door looking at me. "What did you see?" I asked. "Enough to never open that door again," she said. "Renata, what did you see?" She took a moment. "I saw that he was turning around, and I saw that you were standing still. That was enough. That night we didn't sleep. We sat in the living room with all the lights on until dawn. The next morning I went down to talk to Don Heriberto. No beating around the bush, no excuses. I went straight to the point. Don Heriberto, last night the door to 404 was open, and there was someone inside. The doorman looked at me for a very long moment. "Did you see anything?" he asked. "Yes." Don Heriberto nodded very slowly, with the expression of someone who has waited for this moment for a long time. and doesn't quite know how to handle it now that it has arrived. Mrs. Castaño lived in that apartment for 40 years, he said. When she died, the apartment was left in the name of her nephew, who lives abroad. The nephew has never come to Colombia, but he has neither sold nor rented the apartment. When I asked him why many years ago, he told me that his aunt had asked him to leave it as it was, that there were things in there that could not be moved or disturbed. What kind of things? Don Heriberto chose his words carefully. Mrs. Castaño was a woman who knew how to do things. She wasn't a bad person, that must be said. She was a quiet, polite neighbor who never caused problems. But she knew how to do things that most people don't know how to do. And for 40 years, she did those things in that apartment. When she died, what she had put in that space didn't leave with her. And the door? How was it open? Mr. Heriberto looked at me directly. Sometimes it opens. Not often. But sometimes. As if what's inside wants someone to see it. Or as if Mrs. Castaño still wanted to receive visitors. That same afternoon, Renata and I started looking for another apartment. We left a month later. We didn't say anything to the neighbors or the management about what we had seen because we didn't know how to say it or if there was anything to say that would change things. The building is still there. Apartment 404 is still closed, I suppose, or open depending on what decides what lives inside. I never got to see the face of the figure that was turning. Renata says it's the best thing that could have happened to me. I don't know if I agree. Sometimes I think a part of me still wants to know what I would have seen. And that part worries me more than anything else. That's all Camila wanted to share. That's what she sent me over 3 nights, in 3 parts, as if she needed to take a breath between each one. Camila wrote to me that she finished her degree, that she now works at a digital magazine, and that she never returned to that neighborhood in downtown Bogota. She says there are streets that one decides not to cross anymore, not exactly out of fear, but out of respect. I think it's a distinction worth making. Fear paralyzes, respect moves. If you ever lived in a place that held something you weren't meant to know, tell me if you want. And if this story accompanied you tonight, I'm glad. Sleep well. We'll talk in the next one. This story was sent to me by a listener who signs as Tomás from the north of Argentina. He wrote to me that he has been trying to find an explanation for 3 years and has already given up. What happened to him occurred when he was 40 years old, in a mountain hotel, where he stayed for just 1 night for work. 1 night was enough. If you have ever had an experience in a place that felt wrong from the very first moment, tell me about it below. Now, this is what Tomás experienced. I am a seller of agricultural machinery. I say this because it is relevant. My job consists of traveling routes, visiting producers, spending nights in hotels in towns that do not appear on most tourist maps. I have been doing this for 20 years. I have slept in places ranging from perfectly comfortable to barely tolerable, and throughout that time, I developed a capacity to adapt to any space without thinking too much about it. I enter, leave my suitcase, take a shower, sleep. The next morning I leave. Hotels are interchangeable rooms, nothing more. That's why what happened to me at the hotel in Cañada Oscura is so difficult for me to assimilate even now, 3 years later, because I am not suggestible. I do not seek these things. I had no reason for my mind to fabricate what I am about to describe. It was a Wednesday in July. A dry winter. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones. A clear and dark sky, like those seen only far from the cities. I was heading to a meeting with a big producer in a town that was 3 hours away, and the company's protocol in such cases is to stay the night before to arrive rested for the morning meeting. The GPS took me to Cañada Oscura, which was the closest town to the producer's field. I arrived around 9 at night. The town was small even by my standards, a main avenue with some closed shops, a gas station, a church, and the hotel. The hotel was simply called Hotel del Camino. It was a 2-story building, one of those constructed in the 70s that never quite decided whether to be functional or have character, and in the process it achieved neither. With a facade of exposed bricks, a sign with illuminated plastic letters, and a dirt parking lot in front where there were 3 other vehicles. I entered. The reception was a wooden counter with a lady in her 60s who looked up from the television when the doorbell rang. "Good evening, a room please." She handed me a form to fill out, processed my card, and gave me a key with a plastic keychain that had the number 12 written on it with a marker. "Second floor at the end of the corridor," she said. "Breakfast is from 7 to 9. "Thank you," I said. "Sir," she said as I was turning away. I stopped. "The heating in room 12 takes a while to warm up," he said. "Leave it on since you enter." "Understood," I said. I went up the stairs with the suitcase. The corridor on the second floor was long and narrow, with a carpet of a red that had been intense at some point, and that time had worn down to a dull brown. The walls had that wallpaper from the 80s, with a geometric pattern in colors that must have been modern 4 decades ago. The room doors were made of dark wood with brass numbers. I walked to the end. Room 12 was the last one in the corridor, against the back wall. I opened the door and entered. The room was what I expected. A double bed, a wardrobe, a table with a chair, an old television on a low cabinet, a small bathroom with the shower marked by lime. The cold inside was almost the same as outside. I found the heating thermostat on the wall next to the door and turned it up to the maximum, as the receptionist had instructed me. I left my suitcase, took a shower with water that took too long to heat up, put on my sleepwear, and got into bed. I had a meeting at 9 in the morning. I needed to sleep. The heating started to work slowly, with that pipe sound that old systems make, a metallic and rhythmic tapping that at first seems like it will be annoying. And then the brain incorporates it as background noise and ignores it. I fell asleep before 11. I woke up at 2:40 in the morning. I don't know what woke me up. There wasn't a specific noise that I could identify afterward. I just woke up suddenly, with that particular feeling of alertness that one has when something in the environment changes while sleeping and the brain detects it before consciousness does. The room was dark. The heating was still running, the constant metallic tapping. The temperature had risen enough that the cold was no longer aggressive. I lay still in bed, staring at the ceiling, letting my consciousness finish waking up. I didn't feel anything particularly abnormal, just the state of alertness without a specific object that sometimes comes with a sudden awakening in an unfamiliar place. Then I heard the breathing. It was slow, regular, the rhythm of someone asleep, or someone who wants to seem asleep, and it was coming from the chair in the corner, next to the table, about 2 meters from the bed. I got up in bed very slowly, trying not to make any noise, and looked towards the corner. In the darkness I could make out the silhouette of the chair, and on the chair, there was something sitting. I couldn't see details. It was too dark for that. But the silhouette was unmistakable, something that occupied the space of the chair, with a volume that corresponded to that of a person sitting, with what seemed to be a head slightly inclined forward, like someone sleeping sitting up. I remained absolutely still. The breathing continued, slow, regular, without variation. I reached out my arm towards the nightstand, searching for the lamp switch. I found it and pressed it. The room was illuminated with the dim light of the nightstand lamp. The chair was empty. I kept looking at it for a time I couldn't measure. The simple wooden chair, with the straight back, completely empty. The table behind, with the glass of water that I had placed there before falling asleep, intact. I listened. Silence, except for the heating. I got up and checked the bathroom. Empty. The closet. Empty. I looked under the bed. Nothing. The room's door was still locked from the inside, the security chain on as I had left it. There was no one. I sat on the edge of the bed with the lamp on and tried to think calmly. It was possible that I had been half asleep and that the darkness and a particular angle of the shadows had created an illusion. It was possible that the breathing I had heard was a sound from the heating or the building that my sleepy brain had interpreted differently. Everything was possible. I lay back down with the lamp on and took a long time to fall asleep again. When I did, I dreamed. In the dream, I was in the same room, but it was different. Older, with different furniture, with wallpaper that was not the same. There was a window where I remembered there being a wall, and through that window, a light came in that did not correspond to any time of day. In the corner chair there was a man sitting. I saw him from behind. He was older, with white hair and the hunched posture of someone who has carried weight for a long time. He wore clothes that were not from this era, that kind of work clothing that men from the countryside wore 50 or 60 years ago. He did not move. In the dream, I approached him with that particular logic of dreams, where one does things that one wouldn't do while awake. I walked until I was right behind him, and he spoke without turning around. "You shouldn't be in this room," he said. The voice was old and dry, like paper that crumbles. "Why?" I asked in the dream. "Because this room is already occupied," he said. I woke up. It was daytime. Light came through the blinds, and the lamp on the bedside table remained on, pale and useless against the morning light. The phone clock read 7:15. I got up, took a shower, got dressed, and went down for breakfast. The lady at the reception also attended to the dining room. There were 2 other people having breakfast at separate tables, men who looked similar to me, travelers or workers passing through. I had coffee and croissants at a table by the window and looked at the main street of the town that was beginning to wake up with the slowness of small places in winter. When the lady came to offer me more coffee, I made the decision to ask her. "A question," I said. "Room 12. Does it have anything particular?" She looked at me. "Particular in what sense?" "In any sense," I said. "Is there anything I should know about that room?" The lady placed the coffee pot on the table with more care than was necessary. "Why do you ask?" "Because I woke up at 3 in the morning thinking there was someone in the room." She didn't respond immediately. She looked towards the other tables, as if checking that the other customers weren't listening. "Did you see anything?" she asked in a lower voice. "A silhouette in the chair. When I turned on the light, there was nothing." The woman nodded slowly, with the expression of someone who is not surprised, but wasn't expecting to have this conversation. "That room has a history," she said. "It's not something we put on the sign, as you can understand." "What kind of history?" She hesitated. "The hotel is 40 years old, but the building is older than that. Before it was a hotel, it was other things. And before that, on the land, there was a house. In that house, in the room that is now 12, a man died a long time ago. Alone, in a chair. He was found days later. Who was he? An old man who lived alone. He had no family here. No one really knows where he came from or how long he had been in the town. The old folks say he was a strange man, who didn't talk to anyone, who went out little. And since then, since the hotel has been operating as such, there have been guests who complain about 12, she said. Not all, not always, but every so often someone comes down in the morning with that face you have now. Why do they keep using that room?" She looked at me with something that could have been shame or could have been resignation. "Because most of the time nothing happens," he said. "And because the hotel has few rooms and we can't afford to leave one empty permanently." I paid for breakfast, went up to get the suitcase, and when I entered the room for the last time to make sure I wasn't leaving anything behind, I paused at the door for a moment and looked at the chair. It was just a wooden chair in the corner of a hotel room. But as I looked at it, I remembered the voice from the dream. That old dry voice. "This room is already occupied." I took the suitcase and left. The meeting went well. The producer signed the order I needed, and I returned home that same afternoon by a different route, avoiding Cañada Oscura, even though it added 40 minutes to the trip. I don't know if what I saw in that room was the ghost of the man who died there decades earlier. I don't know if dreams can be visits or if they are just the brain processing what it absorbed during the day. I'm not the kind of person who needs these things to have a label in order to carry them. What I do know is that since that night, when I arrive at a hotel and enter the room, the first thing I do before leaving the suitcase is look at the chair, just to make sure it's empty. So far, it always is. So far. That's all Tomas wanted to share. He told me that he never stayed in that town again, and has no plans to do so. I completely understand why. If you've had an experience in a hotel or a transient place that you never quite figured out, I would love to read it in the comments. Those brief stories are sometimes the ones that weigh the most. And if you stayed listening until now, subscribe to keep receiving more testimonies like Tomas's. Good night. We'll hear from you in the next story. I received this account from a follower named Lucia, who worked as a night librarian at a private university in Montevideo, Uruguay. what she found during an inventory of ancient books in the basement, and the consequences of opening a sealed grimoire forced her to leave not only her job but the entire city. If you have ever worked with ancient books or forbidden manuscripts and felt that some pages should not be read, let me know in the comments. This is the story of Lucia and the book that released something that had been waiting for centuries. My name is Lucia, and for 5 years I worked as a librarian at San Ignacio University in Montevideo. It wasn't a large university, but it had an impressive library, especially its collection of rare books and ancient manuscripts dating back to the colonial period. My job was mainly administrative, cataloging new acquisitions, assisting students with research, maintaining order in the reading rooms. But once a year, during the summer holidays when the university was almost empty, I was assigned a special task, taking inventory of the rare book collection in the library's basement. It was a tedious job, but one I enjoyed. I spent days alone in the basement, surrounded by books that were hundreds of years old, some so ancient that you had to wear white gloves to handle them. There were Bibles from the 16th century, obsolete scientific treatises, collections of poetry by forgotten authors, and my favorite, natural history books with hand-drawn illustrations of plants and animals. Last summer, during my 5th annual inventory, I found something that was not in any catalog. I was in the farthest section of the basement, behind shelves that probably hadn't been moved in decades. There was a wooden box, old and covered in dust, so thick that I had to wipe it with a cloth to see what was engraved on the lid. The engravings were strange symbols, not religious in the traditional Catholic sense, but something older. Circles within circles, stars with too many points, words in what seemed to be Latin but distorted. The box was locked with a rusty iron padlock. I searched for a key in the library archives, but there was no record of this box at all. It was as if someone had hidden it there and then erased all evidence of its existence. My professional curiosity overcame my caution. I used a pry bar to break the padlock. Inside the box, wrapped in black fabric that disintegrated at the touch, was a book. It wasn't large, perhaps the size of a modern notebook, 20 centimeters by 15, but it was thick, at least 300 pages, bound in what seemed to be dark leather that felt strangely warm to the touch. The cover had a single symbol engraved in gold that still shone after what must have been centuries. And when I opened the book, I felt something. A pull, as if something inside was happy to finally be discovered. The first pages were in Latin. I could read enough to understand that it was some kind of grimoire, a book of ritual magic. The date on the first page said 1624, and the author identified himself only as Brother Augusto of the Order of Seekers. There were diagrams of ritual circles, lists of ingredients for potions and ointments, instructions for invoking and controlling lesser spirits, and in the later sections, something darker, rituals for opening doors between realms and trading with the hungry. As a librarian and historian, I knew that these books existed. 17th century Europe was obsessed with the occult, alchemy, and magic, but I had never seen one firsthand. What made this book particularly unusual was that approximately 2/3 of its pages were sealed, literally sealed with red wax that had been melted between the pages, sticking them together. And on the wax, there were stamped symbols similar to those on the cover. On the last unsealed page, there was a warning written in ancient Spanish. Whoever reads beyond this point invokes what they cannot control. The sealed pages contain knowledge forbidden by order of the Holy Inquisition. They were sealed with protection rituals and must remain so until the end of time. May God have mercy on the soul of whoever breaks these seals. I should have stopped my research there. I should have catalogued the book as a dangerous historical artifact and locked it away. But there was something in those sealed pages that called to me, a curiosity that went beyond the professional, that felt almost like compulsion. Over the next few days, I researched everything I could about Brother Augusto and the Order of Seekers. I found very little. There were vague references in Spanish Inquisition documents about a heretical order that operated secretly in the American colonies in the early 17th century. They supposedly practiced ceremonial magic by mixing Catholicism with indigenous traditions and occult knowledge brought from Europe. The order was pursued and destroyed around 1630. Its members were executed and their books burned. Apparently, this grimoire had survived, hidden, forgotten for almost 400 years. And now it was in my hands. On the night of the summer solstice, alone in the basement of the library at 2 a.m, I made the stupidest decision of my life. I decided to open the sealed pages. I used a knife to carefully pry under the wax, trying not to damage the paper underneath. The seals resisted. The wax was harder than it looked, but eventually they began to give way. When I broke the first seal, I felt a change in the air. The temperature in the basement dropped noticeably. My breath became visible, and I heard something, a whisper, barely audible, as if someone were speaking from very far away. I continued. I broke the second seal, the third, the fourth. With each broken seal, the whisper grew louder, clearer. I still couldn't understand the words, but there were definitely voices. Multiple voices speaking at the same time in languages I didn't recognize. Finally, all the sealed pages were open. I spread them carefully and began to read. What those pages contained was disturbing. They were not just rituals, they were contracts, written agreements between Brother Augusto and entities he called the Hungry of the Threshold, entities that existed in a plane adjacent to ours, feeding on vital energy, waiting for opportunities to cross. The described rituals were not to briefly invoke these entities to ask questions or request favors. They were to open permanent doors for them, to give them anchors in our world in exchange for power. And on the last sealed page, there was a specific ritual, the ritual of the Dark Mirror Summoning. According to the text, this ritual would open a stable portal that would allow the hungry to cross freely between worlds. Brother Augusto never completed the ritual. There was a note in the margin saying that the Inquisition had discovered his plans and that he was being hunted. He sealed the pages in the hope that someday, someone worthy would find them and complete his work. As I read this, the whispering voices had become clear. They spoke in ancient Spanish now, directly in my mind. Finally, someone has broken the seals. Complete the ritual, Lucia. Open the door for us. I froze. They knew my name. How could they know my name? We have been waiting, watching through the cracks between worlds. We have seen you work in this place. We chose you. You are curious, intelligent, and ambitious enough to want more than what life has given you. It was true. I had been frustrated with my career. 5 years in the same position, with no promotions, no real recognition of my work. I had started to feel like my life was stagnant. Complete the ritual and we will give you knowledge, power, the ability to change your reality. Everything Brother Augusto sought and more. You just need to open the door. I slammed the book shut, my heart pounding wildly. No, I was not going to perform any ritual from a 17th century magic book. This was ridiculous. The voices were probably hallucinations caused by working too many hours in a poorly ventilated basement. But when I tried to get up to leave, I found that I couldn't move. My legs wouldn't respond. And the book in my lap opened by itself, the pages turning until it reached the ritual of the Dark Mirror Summoning. Read it, the voices commanded. Read the ritual aloud. It's all you need to do. Just words. What harm can simple words do? My mouth opened, and without my conscious intention, I began to read. The words flowed from me in Latin, a Latin I didn't know I could speak. My voice echoed strangely in the basement, creating echoes that shouldn't exist in that space. And as I read, things began to happen. The basement lights flickered and dimmed. Shadows in the corners grew deeper, more solid. And in the large mirror hanging on the back wall of the basement, used to check that the books were properly positioned on the shelves, something began to appear. At first it was just a distortion on the surface of the mirror, like ripples in calm water. But gradually the ripples became more violent. And behind the glass I could see something moving, shapes pressing against the mirror from the other side, trying to break through. When I finished reading the ritual, my mouth closed and control of my body returned. I stumbled to my feet, moving away from the mirror, the book, everything. But it was too late. The mirror cracked. A fissure appeared in its center, spreading like a spider web. And from the fissure, something began to seep. It was neither liquid nor gas, but something in between. Tangible darkness spilled from the mirror like ink in water. And from that darkness, they emerged. The hungry. They had no fixed form. They were a mass of shadows that constantly shifted, vaguely taking on humanoid shapes before dissolving into something completely different. Where their faces should have been, there were black voids with what appeared to be mouths, circular openings filled with needle-like teeth arranged in spirals. And they were hungry. I could feel it emanating from them like heat from an oven. A hunger that had been unsatisfied for centuries, contained behind seals and barriers, finally unleashed. They moved towards me, gliding over the ground without really touching it. The voices in my mind were now a chorus. "Thank you, Lucia. Thank you for opening the door for us. Now, as is customary, the one who opens the door must be the first to feed us." I stepped back, stumbling over boxes of books. "No, I didn't know. I didn't want to. But you did. You read the ritual. You broke the seals. Your intention doesn't matter. The consequences are the same." The closest creature extended what could be an arm. When its shadow touched me, I felt something being pulled from me. Not physically, but something deeper. Life energy, memories, emotions, everything being drained like water through a drain. I fell to my knees, suddenly exhausted. And as the creatures moved closer, I saw my life flowing towards them, feeding them, making them more solid, more real in our world. I was going to die here, in the basement of a library, drained until I became an empty shell by entities I had foolishly unleashed. But then, something else appeared. Another figure materialized in the basement, but this one was different. It looked human, a middle-aged man dressed in the black habit of a 17th century Catholic priest. And when he spoke, the creatures stopped. "Enough!" he commanded with a voice that resonated with authority. "She is ignorant of the true laws. She cannot be claimed under the rules of the ancient pact." The creatures turned to him. "Brother Augusto, you have been watching, always watching, waiting. I knew that eventually someone would find my book. I had hoped it would be someone more prepared. But it doesn't matter. The rules are clear. Only a voluntary practitioner who fully understands the consequences can be claimed as payment for opening the portal." "She read the ritual," the creatures protested. "Under compulsion. You forced her. That nullifies the contract." Brother Augusto turned to me. "But the portal is open, and it must be closed properly or more of the hungry will cross." "How?" I managed to ask weakly. "There is a closing ritual in the book, but it requires a sacrifice. Someone must stay on their side when the portal closes, acting as a living seal." "You?" He nodded sadly. "I have been waiting for this moment for nearly 400 years. When the Inquisition captured me, I managed to escape through the spiritual realms using the same knowledge I had learned. But I was trapped between worlds, neither fully dead nor fully alive. This is my chance to finally find rest. What do I need to do?" Brother Augusto indicated the book to me. "Read the sealing ritual. It's in the last pages. When you finish, the portal will close with me and with them on the other side." I took the book with trembling hands and found the ritual. It was in Latin, but this time I understood the words somehow, as if the knowledge had been implanted in my mind by the previous ritual. I began to read. The words flowed from me, and I felt power moving through the basement. The mirror began to glow with a white light that pulsed in sync with my reading. The creatures roared with fury, trying to reach me to stop me. But Brother Augusto stood between them and me, creating some kind of barrier with his remaining energies. "Quick!" he shouted. "I can't hold them off much longer." I read faster, the Latin words becoming a torrent. The light from the mirror intensified to blinding. And then, with one last phrase, the ritual was completed. The mirror exploded. Glass fragments flew everywhere. But instead of falling, the fragments were pulled towards where the mirror had been, forming a vortex. And in that vortex, the hungry and Brother Augusto were sucked in. I heard their last word before disappearing. "Forgive." The vortex closed. The glass fragments fell to the ground. The basement was left in absolute silence. I stayed there trembling, barely able to process what had happened. The grimoire in my hands suddenly felt heavy. I looked at it and saw that the pages I had opened were darkening, the words disappearing as if they were written in ink that was evaporating. In moments, all the pages of the ritual were blank. The knowledge had been consumed in the closing of the portal. The book was now just an inert historical artifact. I left the basement and went straight to the library director's office the next day. I told him I had had an accident with the mirror in the basement, that it had fallen and broken. I showed him the grimoire, but only the blank pages, explaining that it was probably just a blank notebook that someone had lavishly bound as a joke centuries ago. He accepted my explanation without questioning it. Why wouldn't he? The alternative was too absurd to consider, but I knew the truth. And I couldn't continue working in that basement, in that library, knowing what was there, what could still be there in other undiscovered books, in other sealed artifacts. I quit 2 weeks later. I left Montevideo completely, moving to Buenos Aires to start anew. Now I work in a modern bookstore that only sells books published in the last 10 years. Nothing old, nothing with a dark history. But sometimes, when I pass by mirrors, I see something in my reflection. A shadow that shouldn't be there. A movement in the periphery that disappears when I look directly. And I wonder if I really closed the portal completely, or if I left some crack, some residual connection between the hungry and our world. A connection that uses me as an anchor because I was the one who originally freed them. I have no answers. I only live with the uncertainty and the guilt of knowing that my curiosity almost destroyed the barrier between our world and something dark that had been contained for centuries. The grimoire of Brother Augusto remains in the rare book collection of San Ignacio University. It is probably now catalogued as a blank notebook from the 17th century, a historical curiosity without real value. But I know what it was, and I pray that no one else has the foolishness to investigate too deeply, to search for hidden seals, to attempt to restore the words that have faded from its pages, because the hungry are still there, on the other side, waiting, hungry, and they will always seek another opportunity to cross, another portal to open, another curious and ambitious soul that can be manipulated to break the seals that contain them. Brother Augusto sacrificed his eternal rest to close the portal that I opened. It is a sacrifice I cannot forget, nor a weight I can lay down. That is my story, my confession, and my warning. If you ever find a sealed book, pages stuck together with ancient wax and strange symbols, leave it closed. Some doors were sealed for very good reasons, and some things waiting on the other side must remain there forever. Thus ends Lucia's testimony. She told me that she still has nightmares about the hungry ones and that she completely avoids old books now. If you have ever worked in libraries, archives, or special collections and have encountered sealed or forbidden books, I would like to hear about your experience in the comments. Sometimes knowledge comes with a price we are not prepared to pay. Sleep well tonight. This story was sent to me by a follower named Elena, who worked as a real estate agent showing properties for sale. What she discovered in the basement of a Victorian mansion made her quit her profession and move out of state. If you've worked in empty houses and felt that you weren't as alone as you thought, let me know in the comments. Now, this is Elena's experience with something that had been waiting in the darkness for over a century. My name is Elena, and for 10 years I worked as a real estate agent in New Orleans, Louisiana. I was good at my job. I knew the market, and I knew exactly what to say to close a sale. But after what I experienced 6 months ago, I will never enter an empty house alone again. It all started when my boss assigned me a special property. The Beaumont mansion had been on the market for years without selling. It was an impressive Victorian structure from 1872, located in the Garden District, with 3 floors, 12 rooms, and extensive gardens surrounded by a wrought iron wall. From the outside, it was beautiful. The kind of property that should sell within weeks. But there was a problem. All the agents who had shown it before reported that potential clients fled after the visits, pale and refusing to give explanations. Some agents even quit after working with the house. My boss was desperate to get rid of it. "Elena, you're my best agent," she told me. "If anyone can sell this house, it's you. The owners have significantly lowered the price. You just need to find the right buyer." I accepted the challenge without thinking. A commission on a mansion in the Garden District would be enough to cover my expenses for months. I scheduled my first visit to the property for a Tuesday afternoon. I arrived with my briefcase, my tablet, and my usual professional attitude. The mansion was even more impressive up close. The exterior walls were made of dark red brick, with tall arched windows and a wraparound porch with white columns. The gardens, although neglected, showed signs of having been magnificent once. I used the key my boss had given me to open the front door. It creaked open with a sound that echoed in the empty foyer. The interior smelled stale, of dust and dampness, but nothing unusual for a house that had been unoccupied for months. The foyer had high ceilings with ornate moldings, a curved mahogany staircase leading to the second floor, and crystal chandeliers covered in dust. The floors were made of fine wood, stained by time but still beautiful. With some minor renovations, this house could be spectacular. I spent the first hour exploring and taking photographs for the updated listing. The ground floor had a formal living room, a dining room capable of seating 20 people, a library with floor-to-ceiling built-in shelves, and a kitchen that needed to be completely remodeled. The second floor had 6 bedrooms, each with its own bathroom. They were empty except for some furniture covered with dusty sheets. The windows let in filtered light through heavy curtains that probably hadn't been opened in years. The third floor was an attic converted into what seemed to have been service rooms in the past. Small rooms, slanted ceilings, tiny windows. Nothing particularly interesting from a sales perspective. It was when I went back down to the first floor that I noticed something I had overlooked before. In the back hallway, behind the kitchen, there was a wooden door, painted the same color as the walls, almost camouflaged. I opened it and found stairs descending into darkness. The basement. For some reason, it wasn't on the plans I had reviewed. I searched for a light switch on the upper wall of the stairs. I found it and flipped it, but nothing happened. The bulbs must have been burnt out, or there simply wasn't electricity connected in that section. I took out my cell phone and used the flashlight. The wooden steps creaked under my weight as I descended. The air grew colder with each step, and the smell changed from simple dampness to something more organic, almost sweet, like rotting flowers. The basement was larger than I expected, extending beneath the entire footprint of the house. The ceiling was low, with wooden beams darkened by over a century of moisture. The walls were made of stone, sweating with condensation, and along the walls were things, shelves filled with glass jars covered in dust. I approached to examine them more closely. They contained murky liquids, preserved roots, and in some cases, things I preferred not to identify. There were also old books stacked in boxes, their pages yellowed and brittle. On the back wall, there was something that made me stop. Symbols painted directly onto the stone with what appeared to be dark red paint, although something in my instinct told me it probably wasn't paint. The symbols formed a large circle, about 3 meters in diameter, with complex geometric designs inside it. In the exact center of the circle there was a chair, Antigua carved from wood, with armrests that ended in grotesque animal heads, and tied to the chair with rotten ropes that disintegrated at touch, there was clothing. A Victorian dress, complete with corset, petticoats, all strangely preserved, as if it had just been removed from someone's body. This was definitely something that would need to be removed before showing the house to any potential clients. I took photographs as evidence to report to my boss. We would need to hire a specialized cleaning team to get rid of all this. As I was photographing, I noticed something else. On the floor around the chair were wax marks, dozens of circles where candles had been placed and burned down completely. And on the wall, behind the chair, someone had carved words into the stone. I approached to read them. They were in Old French, but my education in New Orleans allowed me to decipher the basic meaning. Here lies the one who traded with shadows. May her pact remain sealed for all eternity. May she never find release. A chill ran through me. What kind of place was this? Clearly it had been used for some kind of ritual, probably in the 19th century when the house was built. New Orleans had a long history of voodoo, witchcraft, and occult practices. It wasn't unusual to find artifacts from that past, but this felt different, darker, more deliberate. I decided that was enough for one day. I would go upstairs, call my boss, and recommend a complete cleaning of the basement before any visits. As I turned to leave, my flashlight flickered. It went out for a second. Then it turned back on. But in that second of darkness, I swear I heard something. A breath. Slow, deep, as if someone had been inhaling after holding their breath for a long time. "Is anyone here?" I called, my voice sounding higher than I wanted. There was no response, just the heavy silence of the basement and the sound of my own quickening breath. I climbed the stairs faster than I had come down, exited the basement and slammed the door shut. Standing in the brightly lit hallway of the kitchen, I tried to calm myself. It had only been my imagination, fueled by the unsettling atmosphere and the strange artifacts. But then I heard it again. Not from the basement this time, but from above. The sound of footsteps on the second floor. Slow, deliberate, moving from room to room. "Hello?" I called up the stairs. "Is anyone up there? This is private property." The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the sound. I stood there in the hallway debating what to do. It could be a vagrant who had found a way in. I should call the police. But then I heard a voice. A woman's voice. Soft, almost musical, singing something in French. The melody was old, melancholic. The kind of song that makes you feel a deep sadness without understanding why. Against my better judgment, I climbed the stairs. Professionally, I needed to ensure that there were no intruders on the property. Personally, something in that voice drew me in, called to me in a way I couldn't explain. The singing came from the master bedroom on the second floor. The door was ajar, and through the gap, I could see movement. A shadow moving against the light coming through the windows. I pushed the door fully open. The room was empty, completely empty. No furniture, no people, nothing but dust dancing in the afternoon sunbeams. But I had felt a presence. I had seen movement. And now, in the air, a scent floated. Perfume. Sweet. Floral. Ancient. "Whoever is here, you need to leave now," I said with all the firmness I could muster. "I'm going to call the police." The laughter that responded did not come from any specific direction. It seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. It was a woman's laughter, but there was no humor in it, only bitterness and something darker. "This is my house," the voice said, now speaking in English with a marked French accent. "It has been my house for 152 years. You are the intruder." I turned in a circle, searching for the source of the voice. "Where are you? Show yourself." "Are you sure you want to see me, little real estate agent?" "Most flee before reaching this point. You are braver, or more foolish. Time will tell." In the dusty mirror hanging on the wall, something began to materialize. At first it was just a smudge on the surface of the glass, like condensed breath. But gradually it took shape. The silhouette of a woman dressed in Victorian clothing, her face hidden behind a black veil. "What are you?" I whispered, unable to look away from the mirror. "I am Marguerite Beaumont, or what remains of her. I built this house in 1872 with the money from my late husband. I filled it with beauty, with life, with light. And then, well, then I made a mistake." The figure in the mirror moved closer, and now I could see more details. Her dress was black silk, the kind worn for mourning. Her hands, visible beneath the lace gloves, were pale, almost translucent. "What kind of mistake?" "The kind you make when you're desperate and alone. My husband died leaving me debts I couldn't pay. I was going to lose this house, everything I had. Then I met someone who offered me a solution. A man who claimed he could give me unlimited wealth in exchange for a small favor." "A pact," I said, recalling the words carved in the basement. "Yes. A pact with something that pretended to be a man, but was anything but human. He gave me gold, enough to pay all my debts and live in luxury for the rest of my days. In exchange, he promised he would come to claim his payment when I died. And what happened?" The figure in the mirror laughed bitterly. "I was clever, or so I thought. I performed a different ritual, one I found in an ancient book of black magic. A ritual that would allow me to bind myself to this house after my death, preventing my soul from being claimed. I thought I would be free. But it didn't work. Oh, it worked. My soul is tied to this house, unable to move beyond these walls. But the demon is also tied here, waiting. Every day, every night, for over a century, it has been waiting for me to make a mistake, to stray from the protections I set, to finally allow it to claim me." I stepped back from the mirror, my mind struggling to process what I was hearing. This can't be real. Ghosts don't exist. Demons don't exist. "Don't they?" Marguerite asked. Her reflection disappeared from the mirror, and, for a moment, I thought she was gone. Then I felt something behind me. A cold presence, so close that if it were solid, it could have touched my shoulder. I turned around, and there it was, not a reflection but a complete manifestation. Marguerite Beaumont, or her ghost, standing 2 meters away. I could see through her to the wall behind, but her form was clear, defined. And when she lifted the black veil that covered her face, I saw that she had paid a terrible price for her pact. Her face was withered, aged beyond the natural. The skin clung to the skull like stretched parchment. The eyes were deep black hollow sockets. The mouth, when it opened, revealed rotten teeth. "This is what time does when you can't die properly," he said. "I keep aging, withering away, but I can never rest. And he waits in the basement, where I performed the binding ritual, waiting for his chance." As if his words had been a signal, I heard something from below. A deep, resonant roar that made the windows tremble in their frames. It was not a sound that could come from any human throat. "He knows you're here," Marguerite said. "A new soul in his domain. He will want to claim you too, just as he has tried to claim everyone who has entered this house." "Then I'm leaving," I said, moving toward the door. "I'm leaving and never coming back." "I wish it were that simple," Marguerite replied sadly. "But you've been in the basement. You've seen the circle. You've broken the seal unknowingly when you took photographs. The light from your device, the flash, disrupted the protections. Now he is stronger than he has been in decades." As if to confirm her words, I heard footsteps coming up from the basement. But they weren't normal footsteps. They sounded heavy, dragging, as if something massive were ascending the stairs. And with each step, the temperature in the house dropped. My breath became visible. Frost began to form on the edges of the windows, drawing impossible patterns. The shadows in the corners of the room deepened, becoming denser, as if they were taking on substance of their own. "Hide," Marguerite whispered, her form already fading away. "Don't look at it directly. Don't talk to it. And above all, don't accept any offer it makes." She completely dissolved, leaving me alone just as something reached the second floor. I could hear it in the hallway, moving with deliberate purpose. I desperately searched for a hiding place. There was a built-in closet in the wall. I dove inside, closing the door quietly, leaving only a small crack to see through. Through that crack, I saw something enter the room, and I wish I had never seen it. It was vaguely humanoid in shape, but completely wrong in all its details. Tall, too tall to pass through normal doors without bending down. Its skin was like dark, cracked leather, with red light shining from the fissures. The horns protruding from its head were twisted, like dead branches, and its eyes burned with a fire that gave no light, only darkness. It moved around the room, sniffing the air. When it spoke, its voice was multiple, as if hundreds of people were speaking in unison in different tones. New soul, young, unmarked, delicious. It stopped, turning its head in a way that no human joint would allow. It was looking directly at the closet where I was hiding. "Do you think I can't smell you? Feel the terror pumping through your veins? Come out, let's talk." I held my breath, not moving. I remembered Marguerite's warning. "Don't look, don't speak." The creature approached the closet. I could see its claws, 5 fingers ending in sharp black nails reaching for the door. Slowly, it began to open it. At that moment, Marguerite materialized again, placing herself between the creature and the wardrobe. "She is under my protection," she said with a firm voice despite her ethereal form. "This is my house. You have no claim over her." The creature laughed, a sound like metal scraping stone. "Your house, yes. But I have a claim over you, Marguerite, and eventually, you will make a mistake. They always do. And when you do, not only will your soul be mine, but also that of anyone you try to protect." "Not today," Marguerite replied. She raised her translucent hands and began to sing in Latin. The words resonated with power, making the air vibrate. The symbols she had seen in the basement began to glow faintly on the walls of the room, appearing as if they had always been there, just invisible until now. The creature roared with fury, but it recoiled. Marguerite's protections, weak as they might be, still held some power. "This is not over," the demon promised as it retreated down the hallway. "I will return, and next time none of you will be able to stop me." She descended the stairs, and I heard the basement door open and close. The cold in the air began to gradually dissipate. I emerged from the closet trembling, barely able to stand. Marguerite floated in front of me, her form flickering faintly. "You must leave," she said. "Now, and never come back. This house must never be sold. It must never be inhabited. It must remain empty until I find a way to end this permanently." "Why did you help me?" I asked. "You don't know me." "Because I have seen too many souls taken by him over the years. Real estate agents, potential buyers, people who simply got lost and sought refuge. They all suffered because I was too cowardly to face my fate over a century ago. There has to be a way to free you, to free both of us from this." Marguerite smiled sadly. "There is a way. The pact can only be broken if someone willingly takes my place. If someone accepts the deal I made, taking on my debt. But I would never ask for such a thing. The condemnation I have lived, I wouldn't wish it on anyone." I went down the stairs with Marguerite floating behind me. At the front door I stopped. "How much longer can you hold on?" I asked. "I don't know. Decades maybe. Or maybe just days. The protections weaken every year. And every time someone enters this house, it awakens him again, makes him stronger. I left the Beaumont mansion and never looked back. I drove straight to my boss's office and resigned on the spot. I told her that the house should not be sold under any circumstances, that it should be condemned and demolished. Of course, she didn't believe me. She thought I was exaggerating for dramatic reasons. She assigned the house to another agent. A week later, that agent disappeared. She entered the Beaumont mansion for a scheduled visit and never came out. The police found her car parked outside, her cell phone in the foyer, but no trace of her. The case remains unsolved. After that, the house was finally condemned. It is closed now, with boards on the windows and warnings not to enter. But sometimes when I pass by at night, I swear I see lights moving behind those boarded-up windows, and I hear a soft singing, a woman's voice singing old French songs in the dark. Marguerite Beaumont is still there, bound to her house, waiting for a release that may never come. And in the basement, in that circle of symbols, something waits with her, waiting for the next mistake, the next unwary soul, the next opportunity to reclaim what was promised to her over a century ago. I moved out of New Orleans 3 months ago. I no longer work in real estate. Now I teach at an elementary school, surrounded by innocent children and structured days. It's simple. It's safe. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still see that withered face behind the veil. I still hear that voice promising to protect me. And I wonder how much longer Marguerite will be able to keep her vigil before the demon finally wins. And I wonder if there will ever be peace for her, or if her punishment will truly be eternal. Thus concludes Elena's experience. She told me that sometimes she still has nightmares about that mansion and what dwells in its basement. The property remains condemned to this day, and rumors of disappearances around it keep the curious away. If you have ever worked with properties that seemed not to want to be sold, share your story in the comments. Sometimes houses hold secrets that are better left undiscovered. Sleep well tonight. There are stories that reach this channel and create a discomfort that is hard to shake off. This is one of them. It was sent to me by Isabel, an elementary school teacher who lives in Mexico City. She wrote to me very calmly, with precise words, like someone who has processed what she experienced, but still needs to tell it out loud to fully believe it. If you are listening to this from your bed tonight, with the lights off, you might want to turn on a small light before continuing. And if something has ever happened to you that you don't know how to explain, write to me. I take the time to read every message. This is what Isabel experienced for 3 weeks in her own apartment, with a mirror that she bought herself at an antique market. I am a teacher. I have been teaching 6- and 7-year-old children to read and add for 19 years. And during that time, I have developed a patience and calmness that have served me in almost everything in life. I am one of those people who do not get easily upset. My friends say I have nerves of steel. My son Tomas says I'm boring because nothing scares me. They were both right until a few months ago. It all started with the mirror. I found it on a Saturday in October at an antique market about 10 blocks from my apartment. I often go to that market, not because I'm looking for something in particular, but because I like to walk among the old things, imagining their stories, the lives of the people who used them. It's a form of rest I discovered when Tomas was small and I needed some alone time to recharge my energy. The mirror was at the back of a stall that sold dark wood furniture and antique metal objects. It was rectangular, with a carved wooden frame, one of those elaborate frames that are hardly made anymore, with intertwined flowers and geometric figures that someone had worked on with a lot of care and time. The wood was dark, almost black, and the glass had that slight imperfection that old mirrors have, a barely perceptible waviness that makes your reflection have a slightly different quality than that of a modern mirror. Softer, more diffused at the edges. I liked it immediately. I asked the seller what price it had, and he told me a reasonable number. I asked him where it came from, and he shrugged. It had been left to him by a lady who was liquidating the furniture from an inherited house, and he didn't know more. I bought it, took it to the apartment in a taxi, and hung it on the wall of the hallway that connects the living room to the bedrooms. Tomas saw it when he came back from his dad's house that afternoon. "Where did you get that?" he asked. I told him from the market. He stared at it for a moment with that expression teenagers have when something catches their attention but they don't want to admit it. "It looks old." he said. It's antique. I corrected him. There's a difference. He smiled and went to his room. And that was it. For several days, the mirror was simply a mirror, a nice object in the hallway that I liked to see as I passed by, which reflected the light from the ceiling lamp well and made the hallway feel wider. In the first few days, I didn't notice anything. It was in the second week when I started to feel something that at that moment I didn't know how to name. A very specific discomfort when passing by the mirror. Not a fear, not something as defined as that. Rather, a resistance to looking at it directly, like when you know there's something in the periphery of your vision but you'd rather not turn to see it head-on. I walked down the hallway looking at the floor, or looking towards the living room, without stopping to see my reflection as I had done in the first few days. I noticed it and explained it to myself logically. I was tired from the semester. Working with the kids was exhausting me more than usual that month, and fatigue sometimes produces those sensations without any real reason. I ignored it. It was Tomas who said something first. It was a Wednesday night. We were having dinner, and he asked out of the blue, "Mom, does the hallway mirror always reflect the same?" I looked at him. "What do you mean, does it always reflect the same?" "I don't know. Sometimes when I pass by, it seems like the reflection takes a moment to follow me." I said it calmly, without alarm, with that practical curiosity that teenagers have when they observe something without knowing if it matters or not. I placed the spoon on the plate and looked at it for a moment. "Old mirrors have imperfections in the glass," I said. "Sometimes that creates strange visual effects." Tomas nodded and continued eating, and I kept eating too. But something in that conversation kept resonating in some corner of my mind for the rest of the night. That night, before I fell asleep, I walked down the hallway deliberately slowly, looking at the mirror straight on. My reflection looked back at me, with my hair tied up and the expression of someone searching for something they don't quite know what it is. Everything seemed normal. The reflection moved when I moved, without delay, without visible anomaly. I went to sleep telling myself that Tomas was right, that it was simply the old glass with its irregularities. 3 days later, what I could no longer explain with the old glass happened. It was a Friday night. Tomas was with his dad that weekend and I was alone in the apartment. I had eaten dinner early, corrected some notebooks of my students, and around 10:30 I went to the bathroom before going to bed. To get to the bathroom, you have to cross the hallway where the mirror is. I passed by it without thinking, and then I stopped. I don't know exactly what made me stop. It was something I registered in the periphery of my vision, something that didn't belong. I turned to look directly at the mirror. My reflection was looking at me. That shouldn't be strange. It's what mirrors do. But there was something different about that reflection, and it took me several seconds to identify what it was. My reflection didn't have exactly the same expression as me. I was standing in the hallway with a neutral, slightly tired expression. The reflection in the mirror had its head very slightly tilted to one side, at an angle that I didn't have. I stood completely still. My heart skipped a beat that I hadn't felt in years. I slowly moved my head to the left. The reflection moved too, to the left. Correct, normal. I moved my head to the right. The reflection moved to the right. Also correct. I stood there for almost a minute, looking at the mirror, moving slowly, searching for the moment when the reflection wouldn't match. I found nothing. Everything was normal. The head tilt I had noticed was no longer there. Or perhaps it had never been there. Maybe it was fatigue. Maybe it was the poor light in the hallway at that hour of the night. I went to the bathroom, washed my face with cold water, and lay down. It took me a while to fall asleep. The next day, in the morning light, the hallway looked completely normal, and the mirror reflected with the clean clarity that things have in daylight. I took my coffee standing in front of it, looking at myself with all the deliberation that I hadn't had the night before, and I found nothing strange. My reflection was perfectly synchronous, perfectly precise. I told myself it had been fatigue. I convinced myself quite successfully, but I started to avoid the hallway at night. I did it without realizing at first, going around through the kitchen to get to the bathroom when it was late, leaving the bedroom door open with the light on so I wouldn't need to turn on the hallway light. Only after several days did I realize what I was doing, and I stopped to think about it. I, who according to my son was not afraid of anything, was reorganizing my routes within my own apartment to avoid passing in front of a mirror at night. The next time something happened was on a Tuesday. Tomas was in the apartment, in his room studying. I was in the living room preparing materials for the next day. It was around 9 at night. I heard Tomas leave his room and walk down the hallway towards the kitchen, and then I heard him stop, and he didn't continue. I waited. Maybe 2 minutes of silence passed. I got up and went to the hallway. Tomas was standing in front of the mirror looking at it with an expression I couldn't quite interpret at first. It wasn't exactly fear. It was more like the intense concentration of someone trying to solve something. Tomas, I called him. He turned to me with a quickness that indicated he hadn't heard me come in. What happened? I asked. He looked at the mirror again, then looked at me. Nothing, he said. Nothing at all. What did you see? A short pause. For a moment it seemed like there was someone else in the reflection. I froze but kept the calm expression that years of being a teacher have given me. Like someone else, like a silhouette, behind me. But when I turned around there was nothing. And when I looked in the mirror again, it wasn't there either. Tomas was looking at me with that direct assessment that teenagers have when they want to know if their parents are going to take something seriously or dismiss it. Have you seen anything strange in that mirror? He asked me. I didn't lie, but I didn't tell him everything either. I've noticed things I can't explain, I said. We'll talk calmly tomorrow. That night I didn't sleep well. Not because I was exactly afraid, but because something had changed. It was no longer just me. Tomas had seen something too, and that shook everything I had managed to build as a rational explanation for the previous days. The next morning I told Tomas that I was going to take the mirror out of the hallway. He didn't object. He helped me take it down, and we put it in the storage room, leaning against the wall, covered with an old sheet. The moment I took it out of the hallway, something in the atmosphere of the apartment changed. Not dramatically, but noticeably. The hallway felt lighter, more ordinary, more like a normal hallway in a normal apartment. That should have been the end. I store the mirror, the problem disappears, life goes on. But it wasn't the end. That same night, past midnight, I woke up. For no apparent reason, just as it had happened in the country house with the cold that night. I simply opened my eyes and was completely awake. The room was silent. The streetlight came through the curtain and drew a pale strip on the floor. And there was something in the corner. I couldn't see it clearly. The room was dark and the corner even more so. But there was a density there that didn't correspond. A concentration of shadow slightly different from the rest of the darkness, with a shape that suggested the verticality of something standing. I didn't move. I didn't scream. I think the brain, when faced with something it genuinely cannot process, sometimes just freezes as a protective mechanism. The shape, or whatever it was, remained still for what must have been 2 or 3 minutes. And then, very gradually, like fog dissolving as the temperature rises, it unraveled. It didn't disappear suddenly. It became less dense until the corner was simply normal darkness again. I lay there, rigid, with my heart pounding, until dawn began to break. When I had enough light to convince myself that there was nothing in the corner, I got up. I went straight to the storage room. The sheet we had used to cover the mirror was on the floor. The mirror was uncovered, with the reflective side facing out. There was no one else in the apartment. Tomas was with his dad that week. I had slept with my bedroom door closed. No one had entered. No one had discovered that mirror. I left the storage room, locked the door, and stood in the hallway for a long time, processing what I had just seen and what I had seen in the corner of my room. Then I did something I had never done in my life. I went to knock on my neighbor's door. Doña Consuelo had lived in the apartment next door since before I moved in. She was a woman of almost 80 years, petite, with white hair and very bright eyes, who had spent her life in that building and knew its walls better than anyone. We weren't exactly friends, but we had that familiarity of longtime neighbors. We greeted each other in the elevator, exchanged cooking products when one of us was missing something, and let each other know if there was any problem in the building. It was 6:30 in the morning, early to knock on someone's door. But I knocked. Doña Consuelo opened with an expression that was not of annoyance but of alertness, as if she had been expecting someone to call. "Isabel," she said. "Come in." I told her everything. Not in an orderly manner, but as things come out when you've been awake for hours and are nervous. In fragments, jumping from the beginning to the end and back, mixing details. Doña Consuelo listened to me without interrupting, with a cup of tea in her hands. looking at me with those bright eyes that missed no detail. When I finished, she was silent for a moment. "Did you buy it at the Alvaro Obregón market?" she asked. I was surprised by the specificity. "Yes, at the back, at Don Gerardo's stall." "I think so." Doña Consuelo left the cup on the table with the gesture of someone who has just confirmed something they already suspected. "That mirror has been circulating for years," she said. "I've seen it appear and disappear in that market. Every so often someone buys it, and every so often someone returns it or throws it away. Once a family left it on the street, in the neighborhood up here. It lasted a week before someone else picked it up. I asked her what she knew about it. What I know is what my mom told me, that she saw it when she was young. She says that this mirror had an owner a long time ago who did things with it that he shouldn't have done, that he used it as a door." "A door to what?" Doña Consuelo looked directly at me. "To whatever is on the other side. I don't know the whole story, but I do know that what enters through that door doesn't leave alone." I asked her what needed to be done. She told me that it wasn't enough to just store it or cover it, that more than one person had already tried that there was a way to close it, but it involved returning it to the right place. "What is the right place?" "There is a lady in Tepito who knows about these things. My mom met her. I have never needed her, but I have the contact of someone who did go to her." Doña Consuelo gave me a phone number written on a little piece of paper that she took out of a drawer, as if she had kept it saved for the moment someone needed it. I called that very morning. The lady's name was Remedios, and she had a calm and straightforward voice that didn't sound like nonsense or drama. I explained the situation in general terms. She told me she could see me that afternoon. I went to her house with the mirror wrapped in a sheet, carrying it in the taxi with the reflective side facing inward, as Doña Consuelo had instructed me. Remedios' house was on a quiet street, an old tenement with an inner courtyard full of plants. She was waiting for me at the door. She was a woman in her 60s, with short hair and firm hands, who wore nothing special and had nothing in her house that made her look different from any neighborhood neighbor, except for some shelves in the living room, filled with candles of different colors and several objects that I did not know how to name. She examined the mirror with the meticulous care of someone who knows exactly what they are looking for. She turned it, checked the frame, ran her fingers over the wood carving. Then she leaned it against the wall with the reflective side facing the wall and turned to me. "Did you see anything in the corner of your room?" she asked. "Yes." "Was this the first night you stored it?" "Yes." "Normal," she said, with a calmness that was both unsettling and comforting to me. "When access to the mirror is interrupted, what uses the mirror as an entry seeks another point. The room where you sleep is the point of highest energy in the apartment because it is where you spend the most hours." I asked her if there was real danger. Remedios considered the question seriously. "Immediate danger, no. What is in that mirror is not something that seeks to cause harm directly. It's more like something that exists in another plane and found a crack to look into this one. The problem is that when something of that kind establishes presence, over time it becomes more permanent, harder to move." "How long has it been established?" "Since long before you bought it. But each new home where the mirror arrives gives it fresh energy. You and your son gave it to it." She explained the process to me. It was more concrete and less dramatic than I would have imagined. It involved cleaning the mirror with certain elements that she would prepare, sealing the frame to close what was open, and finally placing the mirror in a specific location where it could not be picked up and taken to another home. "Can't it just be destroyed?" I asked. "It can be. But breaking an object that functions like this without the proper process sometimes disperses the presence instead of containing it. It's better to close it first." I was at Remedios' house for almost 2 hours. I'm not going to detail every step of what she did because, honestly, there are parts that I didn't fully understand, and I don't want to describe them incorrectly. What I can say is that the process was calm, methodical, without any fuss. Remedios worked with a quiet concentration, like someone doing a technical job that she knows well. At the end, the mirror had its frame sealed with something she applied to the joints of the wood, something dark and thick that smelled like resin, and something I couldn't identify. She told me to take it back to the market where I had bought it and return it to Mr. Gerardo, the seller, and to tell him exactly what she would tell me. I went to the market the next day, Saturday morning. Mr. Gerardo was at his stall. When he saw me arrive with the wrapped mirror, his expression was that of someone who sees something they were already expecting to see. "You're bringing it back," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." Remedios sent me to tell you that it is already closed and cannot be sold again. Don Gerardo looked at the mirror for a moment. Then he nodded. It was not my intention to sell it, he said. I was left with it and didn't know what to do with it. I assumed that if someone bought it, it was because it was theirs. What are you going to do with it now? What I should have done from the beginning, he said. Call Remedios. I left it in its place and left. That night, in the apartment without the mirror, the hallway felt different in a way I can't exactly describe. More neutral, more ordinary, more completely mine. I slept soundly that night, without waking up, without shadows in the corners. When Thomas returned on Sunday and saw that the mirror was gone, he didn't ask what had happened. He just scanned the hallway with his eyes, then looked at me, and nodded with the expression of someone who understands without needing the details. That was 5 months ago. Nothing has happened since. The hallway is just a hallway. The storage room no longer makes me uncomfortable when I enter. Tomas has become the teenager who doesn't believe in anything supernatural again, or at least that's what he pretends. I'm still a teacher. I am still the person with nerves of steel. But now, when I walk through the antique markets, which I still visit because I still enjoy them, I pay more attention to the mirrors. Not obsessively, just with the new awareness that objects have stories and that some of those stories continue, silently, within their surfaces, waiting for someone to open the door to a new home for them. I don't buy antique mirrors. That has changed. That's all Isabel wanted to share. She wrote to me at the end of her message that she still goes to the antique market almost every Saturday, that the pleasure of walking among old things hasn't disappeared, it just became more careful. It seems to me an honest conclusion. There are things that change us without breaking us, that simply adjust the way we look at the world. If you ever bought something at a second-hand market and felt that you brought something more than the object, tell me about it in the comments. Those stories always catch my attention. Sleep well tonight. We'll talk soon.